Hi, everyone. I wanted to take you today into the presidency of Abraham Lincoln, especially the first steps he takes into his presidency. And at first, no one really thought that well of him at all. North, South, no matter who it is, no one really thought that he was capable of that much because he had only had 2 years in national politics. He seemed to just kind of like win the presidency almost by mistake. They didn't realize that he actually was really politically astute. Now, I have a statement there at the bottom that says the country bumpkin, as they called him, is a bit more wise than anyone thought. Our goal here today is to determine the roles and responsibilities of an effective leader in a time of crisis, as it applies to Abraham Lincoln at the beginning of the Civil War. So we want to look at leadership and look at his actions and see, was he being a really effective leader here? Would you do what he did? Now, with this lesson, where I've taken some of these statements, and actually a great application of it is a book called Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin. If you are super into the Civil War, I'd encourage you to pick up that book sometime when you get a chance because it is fantastic. Okay, now, before we even get into Abraham Lincoln, we got to talk about what was going on just before Lincoln became president. James Buchanan was the president from 1857 to 1861, and the only thing he said is this: to the South, I pledge that I will not try to take any more forts. As you secede, as South Carolina and other states secede, I'm not going to try to take your forts. Wherever I have troops, I'm going to keep troops. I'm not going to offend you by any means. Buchanan didn't want the war to happen in his own lap during his presidency. He did not want this thing to happen on his watch. So he's going to push it off, and not be offensive to the South whatsoever. But that puts Abraham Lincoln in a pickle because he still has some troops in some southern forts when he steps into the presidency on March 4th of 1861. So he has a situation on his hands. One of those forts happens to be Fort Sumter, just outside of Charleston, South Carolina. So you see Fort Sumter here. Charleston happens to be one of the biggest trading cities in the entire country. It was the biggest slave trading city in the entire country back during the time period of slave trade. But it is still a huge trading city in 1861. The Union would love to control it and love to stop trade there. But at the same time, Abraham Lincoln doesn't necessarily want to bring war about. He doesn't want to be the aggressor here because he's afraid that even more states will secede and fight against him. So when he takes the presidency on March 4th of 1861, he's got to find a way to try to toe the line and not make too many people angry. And so he tries to figure out, what should I do with Fort Sumter? He brings his cabinet together and he goes in a roundtable discussion to see, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? He has to decide in the end, do I send a ship down there to Fort Sumter? Do I resupply Fort Sumter, maybe even send troops down there? Or do I just give it to the Confederates? Do I just let them have it? Now, one key thing here is this. At the top here, you see Robert Anderson, who is commanding Fort Sumter for the Union forces, only has so much food left. And nobody in Charleston is willing to give him any more food. They want him out of that fort. The Southerners want Robert Anderson and the Union troops out of that fort in Charleston, South Carolina. And so Anderson says, unless I get word by April 15th, when I get some more food because we're going to run out, I got to come home. I have to board a boat. I've got to leave the fort. And so I've got limited time here. So Lincoln, what do you want me to do? Should I stay? And if you do want me to stay, I need food. If you want me to go, I'll go. Sure. Let me know. And so Lincoln goes around to his cabinet members, and here's what they say. Winfield Scott, the first big-time commander for the Union, says, reinforcement of Fort Sumter is only possible with a large fleet and 25,000 troops. Any less than of that would be insufficient, and I see no option but to surrender the fort. So Scott says, give up the fort. Give it to the Confederates. Next, we go to William Henry Seward, the Secretary of State, and actually somebody who really wanted Lincoln's job. And he says, giving up Fort Sumter would be beneficial for political as well as military purposes. I don't need to say another word there. He's saying, give up the fort. Let the South have it. Salmon Chase, Secretary of the Treasury, he says, if the attempt to resupply the fort would so inflame civil war as to involve an immediate necessity for the enlistment of armies and the expending or expenditure of millions, I cannot advise it. Give it up. Give them the fort. Let it go. Edward Bates says, I am loath to do any act which may have the semblance before the world of the beginning of the Civil War. So he's saying, don't fight here. Give it up. Let the South have it. Gideon Welles, Secretary of the Navy, says, the impression has gone about abroad that Sumter is to be evacuated, and the shock caused by that announcement has done its work. It would only cause other damage to follow the course of action that would provoke hostilities. Basically, give it up. Not worth keeping it. Let him have it. Caleb Smith, Secretary of the Interior, says, while the defense of Fort Sumter may succeed, it would not be wise under the circumstances. We should abandon the fort. Basically, give it to the Confederates. Now, we finally get to two people here that actually have the guts to say to Lincoln, you can resupply that fort, and you can fight here, and you don't need to be a coward. So, Montgomery Blair says, Mr. President, surrender of Fort Sumter is virtually a surrender of the Union unless under an irresistible force, that compounding with treason committed against the government. So, you do this, you're surrendering our Union. You must defend it. You must defend our country. Navy Lieutenant Gustavus Fox says, President Lincoln, there are other options for resupply of Fort Sumter than what General Scott has offered. I suggested troop transport escorted by warships that would be transferred onto tugboats and sent to Fort Sumter under the cover of night. If the Confederates would fire upon Fort Sumter, the warships would be waiting in the harbor, ready to return fire. So, hey, we'll send some ships there just to resupply the fort, just to resupply the men. It's just going to be food for hungry men, nothing more. If they fire on them, the war's on them. It's not on us. Now, Lincoln listens to all this. He ends the meeting. He says, we're going to reconvene. I'll tell you when. The cabinet then comes back in a week, and Lincoln wants to hear from some of them again until he finally decides his final decision as to what he's going to do. So he hears from Winfield Scott again, his top commander. And Scott says, our best course of action, Mr. President, would be to evacuate both Fort Pickens and Fort Sumter. The evacuation of both forts would instantly soothe and give confidence to the 8 remaining slave-holding states and render their cordial adherence to this union perpetual. So, give up those forts. Why do we need to keep them anyway? Let the South have them. And then William Henry Seward comes up with another idea, a crazy idea. He says, Mr. President, I recommend that we abandon Fort Sumter. Doing so would change the issue from slavery to union. We could also take this opportunity to change the focus of the nation by demanding explanations from Spain and France regarding their meddling with us, against us, in Mexico. If their explanations are unsatisfactory, we can declare war against them, Spain and France, and this would unite our country against a common foe. Whatever policy we adopt, it must be somebody's business to pursue it and direct this course of action, and I'd be willing to be the representative sent upon this duty. So you can count on me. I'll go down there and I'll deal with this. You could just wait back here in Washington, D.C., but I'm going to ask what Spain and France are doing in Mexico, and maybe the Confederacy will see that we have a common enemy and we can fight them. They don't have to fight us. Lincoln looked at this and thought, that's ridiculous. And he issued this statement at this meeting. Secretary Stewart, within my inauguration address, I pledged to people that I would hold, occupy, and possess federal property, and I plan to uphold this pledge. So Lincoln says, I already promised to hold this fort. I don't need to give it up. I said I was going to keep it. The damage is already done. I may as well keep that fort, hold those troops there. And then he says, as to whatever policy is adopted, I must do it, not you. You are not the person leading this presidency. William Henry Seward come back to him. He wants to be the president. And what Lincoln actually finds out through some friends of his is Seward has been going behind Lincoln's back and promising things down to the people of Virginia, promising the Southerners that he can coax Lincoln into the way of thinking that he wants. And says Seward's the real president here, and Seward should be the next president of the United States. Lincoln right here called his bluff and said, no. I'm leading this presidency. This is my job. This is my position. I won the election, not you, man. And what's crazy is Seward, after this, finally realizes that Lincoln has a ton of promise, a ton of political acuity. He is absolutely intelligent. He's no country bumpkin whatsoever. And they then eventually actually become very respectful of one another and good friends. But anyway, let's get back to the meeting here. The meeting concludes, and it's up to Lincoln to select the course of action, what he's going to do. He actually goes against what most of his cabinet says he should do, but he kind of does it in a very wise manner. He's not going to send any guns or soldiers. He'll send a ship down there, but it's only going to carry food for hungry men. And if the South fires on it, the war's on them, not him. Like, you're firing on a ship carrying food. It doesn't have guns. It doesn't have ammunition. It doesn't have soldiers on it. It's got food. You're really going to fire on a ship that has food for our soldiers? That's on you. The war's on you. And so he sends down this ship that has food on it, and that's all. If they fire on it, it's up to them. He actually sends a message down to South Carolina to say, this is what I'm doing. I want you to know I'm sending a ship down with food. It's not going to be a surprise, but the ship is just going to have food, and that's it. If you fire on it, you have begun the war. I have not. I will not start this war. The war is on you if it's on anybody. And with this move, once again, William Henry Seward, the Secretary of State that was trying to sabotage Abraham Lincoln, he now respects Lincoln and believes in him. And these guys actually become fantastic friends throughout the rest of the presidency. They respect one another. They sit and talk about politics, about the war, about everything, day in, day out, night, day, all the time. They travel everywhere together. But these guys became excellent friends at the end. And actually, they both get attacked. When John Wilkes Booth, the night that he kills Abraham Lincoln, Seward is actually attacked as well. And Seward realizes that Lincoln has been killed because he thinks to himself, if Lincoln wasn't killed, he'd be here with me. My great friend would be here with me to have my back in my time of need. But I know that something is seriously, seriously wrong. Now, to finish here, Lincoln's stroke of genius did not begin with the Fort Sumter decision. He actually made some excellent moves in his first speech as president, his inauguration speech. I want you to go through this presentation and check out the speech because he's trying to make sure that a couple of states, especially Maryland and Kentucky, stay with the Union. He doesn't want to fight a war against 15 slave states. He has to try to keep the South as small as he possibly can, because if there's any chance the North is going to win this war, it'd be a whole lot easier if it's only 7 states that the North is fighting, 9 southern states that the North is fighting, maybe 11 at biggest. But he doesn't want to fight a big, huge South that controls 15 states. The smaller the South is, the better for Lincoln and the better for the North. Now, make sure at the end of this, you fill out your Google form to show me that you picked up the lesson. And I'll see you next time.